water is wide. The water is wide, I cannot cross over, and neither have I wings to fly. Give me a boat that can carry two, and all shall roll my love and I. A ship there was, and she sailed the sea. She's already as deep as we, but not so deep as the love I need. I know not how I sink or swim. I lean my back against some young oak, thinking it was a trusty tree. But first he cried, and then he roared, and thus did bide false love to me. Love is as strong and love is mine, gay as a June when first it's our love grows old and waxes cold and fades away like summer's dew.
We gather here today to celebrate the life and to honor the death of Judge Joe Lee, who many of you knew and loved. So let your presence be welcome here today, and may your hearts sing, for we are remembering the life of a good and caring man. We begin our service today with the lighting of our chalice, the symbol of Unitarian Universalism, a faith that Judge Joe Lee held dear in his heart, and a faith that inspired him for many years. We light this chalice today in memory of the life Joe lived. I have a brief reflection today that I wanted to share with all of you. Many of you have your own stories and memories of Joe. I want to share with you all just how important Joe was and still is to this place in which we are gathered. I give special thanks to David Miller and Carol Lee for offering their insights and a wealth of information. When Joe joined this church in 1956, he found a community that cherished free thought and progressive religion. He found a church that was open to all. It made no judgments about an individual, whether creed, race, age, class, ability, gender expression, or sexual orientation. It was a church that saw as its high ideal the goal of building a caring a community open to all, that lifted up joyful celebration, lifelong learning, and generous service. These were the values that Joe lived by all through his life. 3 years after Joe joined this church, a small group of members, including Joe, came all the way out here to what was then considered the country. The church eventually settled here on this land, all 7.5 acres, because Joe was the one that picked it out. He's the one that saw its potential and saw a future for liberal religion here in Lexington on this very spot. Had he had his way, this land would have been much, much larger. But even so, this land is special. It was the home of a fellow free thinker, Richard Allen, whose farmhouse still stands on this property today. And it's the second oldest building in Fayette County. In the years that followed, Joe served on the board of directors of this congregation, and he even represented this congregation at regional gatherings. He represented this faith. When the building was finally completed in 1965, he endeavored to help set up the religious education for children and youth, which is right below us to this day. I am told that true to his nature as a jurist, he and several friends sought out used furniture, sawed the legs down to make them kid-sized, and painted them bright and joyful colors. Beyond that, for many years, he coordinated Sunday services on a variety of themes. Here in Unitarian Universalist churches, a Sunday theme can include the wisdom of Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism, and so much more. Joe valued such wisdom, and he even offered his own reflections from this pulpit. These services reflected that good old Unitarian desire to honor free thought, lifelong learning, and the inherent goodness of all people. Principles that Joe cared about deeply his whole life. Joe also embodied the principle of generous and lifelong service. In 1970, Joe and a handful of other members of this congregation and community leaders joined forces to create the Emerson Center, an 11-story apartment complex for the disabled and elderly, named after Ralph Waldo Emerson, one of the great minds of modern Unitarian thought. Today, the Emerson Center still stands on Harrodsburg Road and provides 178 units of housing to those in dire need. I can say without a doubt that neither the Emerson Center nor this congregation would be here without Joe, and the people that worked right alongside him in his endeavors. He and all those people were fundamental in the founding of this community. Today, this church continues to grow. In 1998, an addition was added to this church to accommodate new classrooms and office space. My office is rather fantastic, and I'm sure Joe had a hand in the success of that addition. As the new minister of this congregation, my gratitude for Joe and all that he helped accomplish with the other members of this congregation is ineffable. And so too, this church continues to figure out how to foster the principles of free thought and spiritual freedom, from community outreach programs to partnerships with other churches here in Lexington and abroad, as well as sexuality education courses in partnership with the Quakers. This community is vibrant and so necessary here in Lexington, and Joe would not have had it any other way. It is clear to me that Joe was a true Unitarian gentleman. He embodied the values that have flowed into this faith, and he cared deeply for this community, his friends, his family, and the world around him. He had a generous heart and a kind spirit. he will be dearly missed. His life was a gift, and his memory will live on here in the hearts of each and every one of you. And still, too, so long as this community of faith is here on this land that Joe helped pick out so many years ago, he will be with us. May we all endeavor to live our values, to challenge ourselves, to serve those in need, and live lives in pursuit of wisdom and love. Thank you, Joe. You were and still are a blessing.
Good morning. It's good to be with you. My name is Matt Branchini. I'm a member of this church, and I never knew Joe, but my understanding is that in playing the songs and singing the songs that we're going to play, and hopefully you'll help me sing this morning, you get to know him a little bit. If I had a hammer, I'd a hammer in the morning, I'd a hammer in the evening, all over this land. I'd hammer out danger, I'd hammer out a warning, I'd hammer out love between my brothers and my sisters, all over this land. If I had a bell, if I had a bell, I'd ring it in the morning, I'd ring it in the evening, all over this land. I'd ring out danger, I'd ring out warning, I'd ring out love between my brothers and my sisters, all over this land. If I had a song, I'd sing it in the morning, I'd sing it in the evening, all over this land. I'd sing out danger, I'd sing out warning, I'd sing out love between my brothers and my sisters, all over this land. Well, I got a hammer, and I got a bell, and I got a song to sing all over this land. It's a song of the hammer of justice, it's the bell of freedom, it's the song of love between my brothers and my sisters, all over this land. It's the hammer of justice, it's the bell of freedom, it's the song about love between my brothers and my sisters, all over this land.
Thank you, Matt. At this time, I invite Judge Tracy Wise to the pulpit to share her memories of Joe.
Good morning. As you heard, I am Judge Wise, and I, along with 340 other active bankruptcy judges and countless retired judges, have the privilege of holding the title of judge because of the tireless work of the Honorable Joe Lee, a relentless pioneer and advocate for an independent bankruptcy system. We are here to celebrate the remarkable life of Joe Lee. Many of us have attended professional events at which his unsurpassed professional accomplishments have been honored, and that is not my purpose here today. Today I would like to say a few words about Joe Lee, the person, a compassionate and caring man, educator, and public servant. I met Judge Lee when I was a law student at the University of Indiana, or Indiana University, excuse me, and that in and of itself sparked a challenging controversy which continued for years. Judge Lee loved the University of Kentucky and UK sports. He was proud to be from Kentucky. He told me that if I worked hard enough, I could overcome not attending UK. And such a challenge was the same quiet way that Judge Lee challenged anyone who expressed an interest in his work to embrace a deeper understanding of debt and financial forces. Judge Lee was convinced that misfortunes of the general public were often not entirely of their own making, and he embarked on decades of service to balance a right to a fresh start with contractual financial obligations. In the many years prior to our current electronic court system, and as then the only bankruptcy judge serving a geographic area of over 20,000 square miles, Judge Lee tirelessly rode the circuit, carrying an untold number of briefcases and files, and holding court at least monthly in Pikeville, Ashland, Corbin, Frankfort, Covington, and Lexington. Upon his return, he would spend countless hours in the order room, reviewing paper motions and other requests for relief and signing orders. It now takes two of us to do his job. If you are a court employee, you enjoy Judge Lee's deep appreciation for your work. He never lost sight of the role that those who worked with him played in the successful operations of the United States Bankruptcy Court for the Eastern District of Kentucky. He valued the work of every court employee, and his interest in those employees extended beyond the confines of their job descriptions and their tenure with the court. And I see many of his extended court family here today. If you were a litigant in Judge Lee's court, you quickly observed that Judge Lee respected the federal court system and required that respect from its participants. In his court, you were expected to sit quietly, listen attentively, and take off your hat. Likewise, he listened attentively to each litigant with thoughtful respect. He explained his rulings with a quiet delivery in plain-speaking language that was not riddled with archaic legalese. If you were a young lawyer appearing in Judge Lee's court, you were in for an education. Come be not unprepared, not only for the narrow issue on which you were there to argue, but to engage in a colloquy about why the law required a certain result and how other laws may have a bearing on the issue. If you were not on top of your game, without embarrassment or humiliation, Judge Lee would gently guide you to see the error of your ways and why the law required a different result. And finally, his family. Nothing could bring that small smile to his eyes like telling a story about his family, particularly the antics and accomplishments of his grandchildren. A deep thinker, Judge Lee educated students, employees, the public, lawyers, colleagues, and Congress, not only by his words, but by his actions as well. No matter your walk of life, Judge Lee treated you with identical consideration, patience, and kindness. His legacy will extend beyond our years. A remarkable man, a remarkable life. Thank you for celebrating with us today.
Thank you, Tracy. I invite Asher Steinberg to the pulpit.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Carol, for inviting me to speak at Judge Lee's memorial service. It's really a privilege. Judge Lee was my boss and my friend, and I'd like to speak to you today about Judge Lee. I want to apologize in advance if I have hiccups. I'm a chronic hiccuper. Judge Lee was a very caring man on top of everything else. And he was concerned about my hiccups deeply, and one day he came into my office with a 7-page printout from the Mayo Clinic of what hiccups might be a symptom of, what disease I might really have. And page 1, something wrong with your throat. Page 2, you have sensitive nerves. Then he finally gets to page 7, and he has a passage underlined in red ink. And he says, I think you might have a brain tumor. And I don't, but he urged me to get it checked out. So thanks, Judge Lee, for carrying that. On Tuesday, it will be 54 years to the day that Judge Lee was appointed a referee in bankruptcy for this district. Judge Lee remained a bankruptcy judge until his death. He still held that job. Before that, he graduated in law school in 1955. He was a clerk for the Chief Justice of the Kentucky Court of Appeals, then the highest court in the state. And then he was a clerk for the Chief Judge of the District Court here at the Eastern District of Kentucky, here on Church Ford. Went on from that to be an aide to two congressmen in Washington, Carl Perkins and Adam Clayton Powell. And he helped write the minimum wage law in 1961 that expanded coverage of the minimum wage to millions of workers. And then on September 1st, 1961, he took this position to be a referee in bankruptcy in Kentucky, just 6 years out of law school, not having any real bankruptcy experience other than his clerkships where he may have worked on a couple of bankruptcy issues, and not necessarily having had any great interest in bankruptcy. He was perhaps the best credentialed young lawyer in this part of Kentucky, but he came back here, and there's no doubt that at the time he might have viewed it as a stepping stone to bigger and greater things later in his career. But it was Judge Lee's destiny, really, to make bigger and greater things out of the bankruptcy court. Judge Lee was of a generation of judges who saw the law as a means to achieve social change of some kind. Judge Lee wrote only 2 years after he became a referee that his job, what he saw he was doing, was to restore dignity to individual debtors. And 10 years into his refereeship, he said that a bankruptcy case is a federal social work program. A passage when I saw that I was startled. But he administered that program, traveling the state, riding circuit, as Judge Wise has talked about, hearing meetings of creditors and debtors, listening to their stories. And that was what he did. But unlike many judges who saw their role as achieving social change through the law, Judge Lee was remarkably faithful to what the law said, whether in his judicial writings or even in his extrajudicial writings. Judge Lee wrote many treatises about bankruptcy, and I read treatises in my work, and often they're an effort to shape the law according to the goals of the treatise writer. Treatise writers want to cite cases that they don't disagree with, but Judge Lee, when he wrote treatises, he was trying to tell, a consumer debtor or a business debtor or a creditor what they were in for when they got into bankruptcy court. He just said what the law was, what the cases were on one side, what the cases were on another, and he reported cases in his treatises that he didn't particularly agree with or like. And in his opinions, one cannot detect Judge Lee's views, though, he had very strong views about what bankruptcy law should be. But nevertheless, he was quite faithful to the words Congress wrote. Though perhaps that's because so many of those words Judge Lee wrote himself. Judge Lee's maybe most remarkable professional achievement was as a legislator, really as a lobbyist for the National Conference of Bankruptcy Judges. In 1970, the President and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Warren Burger, appointed a blue ribbon panel to make recommendations about the direction the bankruptcy system should go in. It had been living under the same Act of 1898 for over 70 years. And this commission, which included no actual referees in bankruptcy, and certainly not Judge Lee, proposed a system where there would be an agency, a United States Bankruptcy Administration, USPA, that would administer bankruptcy cases. They would conduct all the, quote, administrative tasks of the referees. There would only be 50 bankruptcy judges left in America. Each one of them would have a territory, and they would hear any adversarial litigation that the agency, which was charged with writing regulations about bankruptcy law, any issues that they couldn't handle. You know, there's been some debate about whether this was a good idea. I used to tell Judge Lee, you know, if you would only become the United States Bankruptcy Administrator, you could go to Washington, you could write regulations, and then the district judges would have to defer to what you wrote. But Judge Lee didn't care about that. He had a different vision for the bankruptcy courts, where federal bankruptcy judges on the ground would hear debtors' stories, where every debtor who filed a bankruptcy case would be assigned to a federal bankruptcy judge. And when he shared his views with the commission, and they said, if you have a problem with our proposal, go to Congress, that's what he did. Here in Lexington, he wrote a bill, the judge's bill, for the National Conference of Bankruptcy Judges. He had members of Congress introduce this bill that he wrote largely himself with aides late at night in Lexington after his dockets were through. They introduced this bill in Congress, and Judge Lee really won. We have bankruptcy courts. We don't have this bankruptcy agency. And he won, you know, also on many substantive issues of how bankruptcy law would come out. Judge Lee testified in, you know, maybe a dozen hearings before the bankruptcy code was enacted. And he was in one Senate hearing, and they said, Judge Lee, would you like to make a statement? And he says in 1977, Senator, I want to say a word on behalf of the consumer bankrupt. I have heard spokesmen from the banking industry, and I have heard spokesmen from the consumer finance industry telling you what they would like to see in the bankruptcy bill. But I have not heard anyone speak on behalf of the poor debtor, and so I will. And then he goes on for pages and pages, and finally the senator says, you know, we have other witnesses, Judge Lee. And so you can give us your written statement if you can't make it through what you have to say orally. And so he did. And so the bankruptcy courts were organized largely along the lines Judge Lee and his judge's bill had proposed. Judge Lee did not always, you know, get what he wanted in Congress. After the bankruptcy courts were held unconstitutional in some respects in Northern Pipeline in 1980 or so, Judge Lee came this close in 1984 to having bankruptcy judges be appointed by the president with terms for life and no possible reduction in salary. But it just didn't happen. They couldn't quite get the votes. And 2 years later, you know, in the height of his outrage about this, which, you know, was born largely out of his concern that his station wasn't constitutional, that he was doing things that only an Article III judge could do. 2 years later, he writes in this, you know, funny and also brilliant passage that perhaps this core theory of constitutional law that Congress has created, he thinks, was so readily accepted by Congress because we are all enamored of computer games in which it is permissible for a charismatic, electronically created creature to gobble up every other creature that crosses its path, and moreover score points by doing so. Why not introduce such an enigmatic, animated creature into the field of bankruptcy law in the form of a core bankruptcy proceeding and let it feed on private rights? We might call this Pac-Man, constitutional law. And so he has this 50-page opinion, and then at the end he says, well, you know, the courts above me have already held that what I'm doing is constitutional, so this is just, you know, my thought. And then he went on his way, you know, administering the bankruptcy code that he had largely written in his non-Article III status for the rest of his life. I think that later in his life, Judge Lee lost some faith in the legislative process. There were changes made to the bankruptcy code that he did not like. He was not as welcomed or as he was not as welcomed in the halls of Congress as he used to be. He didn't testify at many hearings about that bill. He wrote a letter to Oprah Winfrey suggesting that she put on a show about the changes that people were proposing to the bankruptcy code. He says, here are the guests we should invite. And I don't think that there's no record that Oprah wrote him back. You know, maybe it wasn't an interesting enough topic for her show. And Judge Lee, you know, when I knew him, was frustrated about many of the changes that had occurred. But he believed that if he wrote about these things, and he was writing articles, until his death, that these articles might make some impact, and in the meantime, he could only follow the law as it had been enacted by Congress. Disagree with it, though he might. I also want to talk about Judge Lee as my friend. Judge Lee was such a remarkable man. I would have lunch with him just about every day. I sat in an office right next to his. And, I personally have very little interest in bankruptcy law. I don't know much about it. And Judge Lee, he only really was interested in talking about bankruptcy law among legal issues. We would go to lunch, and, I would say there's this fascinating case in the Supreme Court. A man has been pulled over for having only one tail light. Turns out that the law says that it's okay. They're looking at this, and he would say, how does the Supreme Court take such, silly cases? There are 20 circuit splits in bankruptcy that they ought to be looking at. And then he would, regale me with all these issues in bankruptcy and all his thoughts about them. One day I was at lunch, maybe only a month or two after I met him, and I was getting bored hearing about all this bankruptcy, and I said, do we always have to talk about bankruptcy? And it was the only time he ever got angry at me. He said, and we're at lunch, we're not in the office. He says, well, that's what we do here. That's what we do here, bankruptcy. And I never, asked him to stop talking about bankruptcy again. Often we didn't have much to say to each other because of these diverging interests, and we would just sit together at lunch quietly, reading different things. But Judge Lee, was somebody who you could enjoy his company, even if he wasn't saying anything to you, or you weren't saying anything to him. He had so much dignity, so much, charm. He was such a good person that it was a pleasure to be around him, even if he wasn't speaking. And when we were at lunch, people would constantly come up to him we hadn't seen in decades and say, Judge Lee, I was so honored to practice before you. Judge Lee, you taught me something about bankruptcy law. Once the chief lobbyist of the Kentucky Equestrian Association, or whatever precisely it's called, walked up to us at the Julep Cup. And he said, Judge Lee, I was in your court during the Calumet bankruptcy in 1990, and I learned so much from you about what it was to be a professional, what it was to be a person of character, how to be honest. And we were really taken aback by this, and he went back to his table. And Judge Lee said, I don't remember that man ever being in my life. And at the time, I had just met him, and I wondered what was this mystical thing happening in his hearings that influenced people so much. But I came to see it. Judge Lee's effort was tireless. When I worked for him, he had only a tenth of the docket that each of the active judges had. He was serving on this recall status. He heard 4 cases about a month. And he spent more time on those 4 cases than anybody could spend on anything. If he was tired and I had written a draft of an opinion, he would wait until he had the energy to really look at it and mark it up, which he would really do. He was a very modest man. Although, somewhat immodest in some ways, which I'll get to. He once said, I never wanted to gain attention by dealing with the misery of others, and he was referring to consumer debtors and their troubles. That doesn't seem right. He said that to the Herald Leader on the day that he retired as an active judge. But if he had your attention, and I was a captive audience, he would tell you about all the things that he had done. And he told me, many amazing stories, one of which was that in 1970, he was a referee, and he was encountering state court judges who wouldn't honor his discharges. And not only they wouldn't honor the discharge of a consumer debtor, but they said they wouldn't do so for racist reasons. That, one state court judge told him that no black man will be able to plead a discharge in my court. And Judge Lee fought to expand federal jurisdiction over dischargeability so that this couldn't happen. And he said that that was, his proudest achievement, not creating really the bankruptcy code or bankruptcy courts as opposed to an agency, but expanding federal jurisdiction so this kind of abuse couldn't occur. He was conscious of the limitations of his abilities. He would say to me that his friend Conrad Sear, who ascended to the First Circuit, started out as a referee, was a much better writer than him, and he wished that he could write opinions like Judge Sear. I think Judge Lee's opinions were good. But he was honest about what he could do and what he couldn't do. And what he did know and what he was very aware of is that, he was about as good a bankruptcy lawyer and an interpreter of bankruptcy laws as anybody. He was a playful man. I remember once I was reading my 50-page draft of an opinion for him in the hall and, admiring all the felicitous turns of phrase and clever ideas that I had. And a case administrator walked by, and Judge Lee said, Asher, he only reads his own stuff. That's all he reads. But as you see, I read Judge Lee's work. And he could be, unexpectedly charming and terribly, terribly endearing. Once he started reciting to me Edgar Allan Poe's poem Annabel Lee, and I didn't understand the significance. And the story of Annabel Lee in Poe's poem is that there's this woman who Poe loves, and she lives by the sea, and then I think the sea takes her away, unfortunately, the waves, current. And then he says, and that poem has always worried me because I have a daughter, Annabelle, and she lives in Florida by the sea. I miss Judge Lee so much. I sat next to him, and often I imagine that I hear him coming in, I see a case, and I would like to tell him about it, but he's not there, and I realize that he's not there. But Judge Lee will never really be gone. You can see Judge Lee in the professionalism of our bar, here in this district. The people who practiced in his courtroom and learned how to conduct themselves and how to make good arguments. You can see him in the case administrators we have in our court, who worked for many years under him and who worked tirelessly, fussing with our dockets and scanning thousands and thousands of pages of pro se pleadings and talking to debtors at the desk. You can see him in our judges who practiced in his court and who learned bankruptcy law from him. And you can see him, everywhere in America in the fact that we have bankruptcy courts. And finally, you can see him in the bankruptcy code, which he, largely wrote. So Judge Lee will always be with us, but he's dearly missed, and I'm glad that I could talk to you about it today. Thank you.
Thank you, Asher. I invite Al Smith to the pulpit.
I am a journalist of sorts and a member of the Judge Joe Lee fan club for nearly 30 years. Carol told me to be very brief because she said if you're not, the food will get cold. So I won't tell you about the time that Joe and I went together to the Abbey of Gethsemane on a two-man retreat to reflect upon our sins and whatever they were. And he brought with him the Jefferson Bible with all the miracles stripped out. And I brought a copy of Thomas Merton's essays on prayer. And for some reason, we each had a whole dormitory to ourselves, a wing, in the seminary, and a great day. And when we left, we stopped by the distillery and had a good drink together. And he did. I drank the water, having retired from my profession as a drinker. And then I won't tell you also about the time I did retire from the Comment on the Kentucky show, and the next weekend, Judge Lee and Carol and my wife Martha Helen and I, and my friends the Pages, who are here from Russellville at the time, we all went to Chicago to celebrate the completion of my television life with a Ramsey Lewis concert, at the jazz concert at a church in Chicago designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. So I haven't told you about that, and we can move on. The judge and I first met in the dark. Lots of lawyers don't want to be seen in the daylight with a journalist. We first met in the dark at pre-dawn walks in Lexington's Fairway neighborhood. I was walking for my health, and Joe was the three-dog man exercising his pets and getting entangled in their leashes. I would wave, he would smile, but not a word passed between us until Carol, who had met my wife Martha Helen shortly after we moved to Lexington, introduced us to him at a Mexican restaurant where they were eating vegetarian burritos. Can you imagine all those folks back home in the Bell County seeing their judge eating vegetarian meals? But he did. I never knew exactly how that happened, but I suspect Carol had something to do with it. And then, over 3 decades of weekly dinners together, the Smiths and the Lees bonded, our wives and I doing most of the talking, with the judge occasionally slipping us an insight. The Supreme Court says money is free speech. You understand that? Or Calipari has another good team. My daughter Catherine asked me what the judge talked about when he spoke, if at all, on social occasions. Bankruptcy, I replied. He's teaching me the law. Basketball, said Martha Helen. He's teaching me the game. Yes, he was a reticent man, a few words, but his was a powerful mind, his thoughts finding expression in memorable research, writing and editing articles, and crafting legal opinions. Yes, and lobbying Congress, in a career that earned him a national reputation as a pioneer for bankruptcy and creditor reform. I recall the night Carol opened her purse in search of a pen to sign the sign the bill for the vegetarian meal, and the check fell out, a bank check. Retrieving it, she explained the check was a royalty payment for Joe's book. His what? I asked. His bankruptcy practice manual, she said, explaining that he wrote it to instruct young lawyers how to write a bankruptcy filing, because so many who came to his court didn't know. Also known familiarly as Lee on Bankruptcy. The royalties for this book and the annual editions that followed, she said, had helped educate Carol to become a CPA, and each of his 4 daughters, Caroline, Annabelle, Caitlin, and Janet, in different fields. Then, with a smile, Al, she said, you might think of those earnings as the Joe Lee Endowment for the Lee women. Somewhat startled, I later concluded that the soft-spoken general jurist from the mountains, son of a Bell County coal miner and an Alabama-born mother, had likely earned more from his legal textbook than nearly all the novelists I knew who turned to teaching creative writing to make a living. Curious for more more background, I pried loose the story of a young lad who was a quarterback on his high school team that thought he brained again. Then joined the Air Force after an older brother, a glider pilot, died in a crash in the invasion of France in World War II. On the GI Bill after the war, he earned undergraduate and law degrees at UK, worked at the Lexington paper at night, and edited the UK Kernel on the side. That work ethic again. Whether it was an impressive college record or political connections through a father who had only a 6th grade education but was a respected union leader, I learned that Joe had fast climbed a ladder, clerking for judges and as a committee aide in Congress, and then at 35, becoming perhaps the youngest bankruptcy judge in America. Of course, Carol had to tell me this, but somehow I discovered that after walking those dogs every morning, Judge Joe taught an early class at UK Law School before holding court in town or heading for the hills to preside over the largest bankruptcy docket in the United States, covering, as was said, some 20,000 square miles in Wales, Appalachian, Kentucky. At the same time, while my new friend was editing the Academy of Bankruptcy Journal with a pencil and a yellow legal pad, I found out that much of the Bankruptcy Reform Act of 1978 was his doing, and that he was strongly opposed to proposed changes at Century's End that he felt were inspired by credit card banks out west and donations to congressmen everywhere. This was a campaign he would lose, but I will report that when the editor of one of our largest papers retired, one to whom I had written many letters urging support of Joe's position, the editor confessed to me, quote, "Not listening to you about Judge Lee was the worst mistake I ever made on the editorial page." By the time the Lees and the Smiths began to spend winters in Sarasota, the judge was in the UK Law School Hall of Fame. Multiple honors from colleagues had piled upon him, and famous senators had called him to Washington for testimony on bankruptcy legislation. Although officially retired, he continued to be recalled for service each year, and he did so with zest until the day he died. Maybe the longest serving bankruptcy judge in our country, certainly the oldest. Our country. On this occasion, I think of the hymn, "Our country 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty," and I think of Joe Lee, the patriot. I remember the time we were raised in, the Great Depression, the New Deal, and 2 world wars, of heroes, Franklin D. Roosevelt and Alvin York, of Perry Lee, brother to Joe and his twin sister, Jean Lee Reisner, and of Perry, his brother, lost in combat for our country, and of Joe, who enlisted to carry on the fight. I remember Mountain Congressman Carl Perkins, who befriended young Lawyer Lee, and John L. Lewis, whose portrait hung in many a miner's cabin long ago. About Appalachia, I'll never forget Mr. Perkins' mantra, "I'm just a beggar for paupers." I think of my wife's father, an Army physician and colonel who died in World War II, and of her mother and Joe's bright sister, rural women who would have been college educated like their men in a later era. I think of the GI Bill and, again, of Joe Lee, the debtor's judge, as one newspaper called him, or as the Huffington Post labeled him, Elizabeth Warren before there was an Elizabeth Warren. Joe was scrupulously fair, but he labored to restore dignity to individual debtors. That was his credo. With Senator Warren, he disputed the description of debtors as deadbeats. Not so, they said, asserting daily that in most cases, the causes the courts are dealing with are loss of a job, serious illness, and divorce. Joe Lee grew up in our hardscrabble hills with the mindset of folk singers Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie. He believed this land is your land, made for you and me. On one of his birthdays, the Lee children arranged for him and Carol to spend a day with Pete Seeger in the New York countryside on the Hudson River. It was a meeting of instant friends with the same convictions. It's the hammer of justice. It's the bell of freedom. It's a song about love between my brothers and my sisters all over this land. Joe Lee, short name, Big Man.
Thank you, Al, and thank you to all three of you for your heartfelt reflections today. I invite you all into the spirit of meditation and prayer. Spirit of life, present within and beyond all that is our lives, open our hearts to the moment before us as we give thanks for the life of Judge Joe Lee. We give thanks for knowing him, for having laughed with him, talked with him, and learned from him. We give thanks for the gifts he gave us, just by being himself, by being alive. May we know in our hearts that he will live on in our memories, but so too may he live on in the good work that we do to ensure a more just, loving, and gentler world. Through our grief, may we remember the joy that Joe embodied. May that joy bring us comfort, and may it inspire us in the days ahead. Let this be our hope today and in all days. Amen. I invite you all now into a moment of silence to reflect on your own memories of Joe, the ways that you knew him, the ways that he touched your own lives. Let us enter into a moment of shared silence. For all those things unsaid and the meditations of our hearts, we give thanks. Amen.
This train is bound for glory, this train. This train is bound for glory, this train. This train is bound for glory, don't care nothing but the righteous and holy. This train is bound for glory, this train. This train don't care no gamblers, this train. This train don't care no gamblers, this train. This train don't care no gamblers, liars, thieves, nor big shot ramblers. This train is bound for glory, this train. This train don't care no liars, this train. This train don't care no liars, this train. This train don't care no liars, these sheets streamlined in the midnight flyer. This train is bound for glory, this train. This train don't care no smokers, this train. This train don't care no smokers, this train. This train don't care no smokers, two-bit liars and small-time jokers. This train don't care no smokers, this train. This train don't care no convent, this train. This train don't care no convent, this train. This train don't care no convent. Wheel dealers in here and gunmen. This train don't care no convent, this train. This train don't care no rustlers, this train. This train don't care no rustlers, this train. This train don't care no rustlers, side street walkers and two-bit hustlers. This train don't care no rustlers, this train. This train is bound for glory, this train. This train is bound for glory, this train. This train is bound for glory, don't care nothing but the righteous and holy. This train is bound for glory, this train.
Thank you, Matt. And so now, dear friends, in the spirit of love and life, of light and grace, go now from this place, holding on to your memories of Judge Joe Lee, holding on to the joy, love, and kindness he brought to this world. We lit this chalice at the beginning of our service in memory and in honor of Joe's life. We now extinguish it in honor of his death. Though the light is gone from us, the memory of its warmth, comfort, and light will always be with us. May you go well, dear friends, and may you go loved. Amen. Just two quick things before you go to the reception today. You are all invited to the reception, and also today is another special day, as it is officially the unveiling of Judge Joe Lee's court portrait. So may you all go well, and may the loved go in peace.